key issue 4 of Chapter 10 is why do farmers face economic difficulties? So we'll be looking at developing and developed countries for this. So challenges for farmers in developing countries, and Esther Bostrup is a name that you should be familiar with. She's an economist. She has a few different theories that we look at in AP Human Geography. So she said her idea is, kind of straightforward. So as population growth comes to developing countries, you've got the need for more food. And so subsistence farmers, which are the main farmers in developing countries, need to intensify their production in order to feed more people. So kind of straightforward, but just know that that's her, idea. And so farming, one of the ways is just intensifying basically human labor and the inputs, which is more machinery, so plows instead of sticks, more irrigation, including more terracing and using gravity for irrigation. By the way, this is in India, and so you've got the monsoon rains coming, and so this is going to allow you to farm more and irrigate. And then things like the inputs, the higher yielding seeds, the fertilizers, the pesticides, things like that. Also can be more weeding, so more just more hands-on, and you have more people because of the population growth, and so that just kind of plays into there. All right, and then the other thing involves the land. So intensifying the land for growing more is leaving the land fallow for shorter periods of time. And so Esther talks about different stages in intensifying the farmland. So the first one is where you wait, and this would be for shifting cultivation. So you use farmland and then you leave that plot of land for 20 years after you've used it a few times and it becomes infertile. And so you leave it for 20 years for trees to grow back. The next one would be leaving it for 10 years for bushes, then only a couple years for grasses, then planting every year, and then multi-cropping, planting a couple times a year. And so just note in that multi-cropping or even every year, you'd probably still be rotating the crops that are on each field so that you could try to replenish some of the nutrients. But really this is going to be, sort of over farming the land, and so leads to the degradation of the soil. Now, I've got over here, we're going to talk about a couple of these vicious cycles that happen, and this is one of them. So you've got poverty, not enough food. So you've got unsustainable behavior, which is using some of these fertilizers and things that are going to deplete the land eventually, and then also just farming too much, not allowing it to regenerate itself. So that's unsustainable. It's going to lead to land degradation, which is of course going to lead to more poverty, and so it just continues that cycle. And here is another vicious cycle, and I've got my vicious bicycle down here that's attacking someone. That's a joke, but again, this is another vicious cycle. So you've got subsistence farmers in the less developed countries needing to grow more food, and they need, as they use those inputs, that the higher yielding seeds, the pesticides, fertilizers, machinery, they of course need those to expand production, but they have to pay in cash for those. They have to pay money for those, and so those generally come from the most developed countries. And so in order to get the money to pay for those inputs, they have to have something to sell to the most developed countries or to export. And so one of the things that they start doing is growing food for export instead of direct consumption. And so some of the things that the most developed countries like the United States are going to buy is fruits and veggies that are in the winter. Here we're going to get fruits and veggies from Central America, for example. And so other things that we can't ever grow, like coffee. So things like that are going to be, and coffee, by the way, is a huge one of the main agricultural exports around the world, especially to the developed countries. And of course, the problem is that when the people in the developing countries then are growing the things so that they can export them to get the inputs so that they can be more productive and farm more intensively, there's less land available for growing crops that they need to actually feed the country, so they need more inputs, and it just continues in this vicious cycle of this never-ending cycle. And so of course you need more of the food to feed the people as this population grows, but it's just not an easy way to solve it. So this is, a lot of countries in the developing world are really stuck in this vicious cycle. Another thing that's a factor here is that governments in a lot of places, and not just in the developing countries, but it's a problem there. Governments force the farmers to price the products low so that people can afford food, but that also makes it so that farmers cannot really make a living and then aren't able to produce even more food, or don't want to produce even more food because they're not making a profit from it. So here's one of the results of this farming too intensively in a delicate ecosystem is the increased desertification in places by deserts, like for example in the Sahel. The Sahel region is a grassland, it's a dry grassland that's on the south side of the Sahara Desert. As people are overgrazing it there and over farming it, the Sahara just continues to get bigger and bigger. So you've got overplanting and larger herd sizes and things trying to support more humans, of course, but that has led to this destruction of the land, this desertification, so it's not helping the people there. All right, so the main challenge of, a major challenge of farmers everywhere in the world, this is commercial, this is subsistence, this is here, this is everywhere, is earning enough income. And so in commercial places where there's a lot of commercial farming, like here, one of the problems is a surplus of food, a surplus of produce, and for subsistence farmers, they're struggling to produce enough to survive or enough to survive and make enough money to buy the things that they might need in addition to their food. And so in overproduction, you've got low incomes because you've got a surplus. You've got too much of it, so the prices go down. So the farmer might not make enough money. We have a lot of the smaller farmers in our country started really going out of business in the 1980s and lost a lot of their farms. And so we have some farmers now that own huge plots of land or farm huge plots of land. So we've kind of conglomerated that into some large landowners, but that's still always an issue, is can the farmer make enough money? Now remember, we have enough food to feed the world, but it's a matter of price that people go hungry. It's a matter of being able to pay for the food that people go hungry. So we don't always use those surpluses to feed people. Another issue with people going hungry is that a lot of times we'll put our excess crops into biofuels like ethanol, corn for ethanol, and so that keeps the prices at a decent rate for the farmers, but then that means that there's less food available and the prices are going to go up for that use of that product as a food. Now the United States government looks at this issue of surplus and addresses it in a couple different ways. So they encourage farmers to produce crops that are not in excess supply. The government, sometimes if the prices are real low, the government will pay the farmers for that product, and then sometimes our government buys surpluses and either donates it or sells it to foreign governments, exports it elsewhere. Speaking of exports, so trade in agricultural products, we've got here the net trade exporter. Mostly the Americas are exporters, and some European countries, okay, and then especially kind of in the center and the east, and then Asia are the net importers. Of course, that's a problem for the poor countries of the world, and if you look at Africa, lots of importing of food, and so of course these are farmers. These are subsistence farmers who just aren't making it. Maybe they're losing their land, maybe their land is becoming less fertile, and so they're really struggling. This just is a pattern of struggling in a lot of those places because they are having to import food in a climate that in land that should allow them to make enough. So it's those vicious cycles that are causing that. The drug trade, we've got the Golden Triangle and the Golden Crescent. So the Golden Crescent is where they, and both of those are where they produce poppies for opium. And the Golden Crescent is Afghanistan, a couple countries nearby, but Afghanistan is the main producer of poppies and opium in the world. The Golden Triangle is secondary to that, and that's Thailand, Burma, and Laos. And I've been up to that region of Thailand. It's so peaceful and beautiful up there, and just this lazy river, and it's just really lovely. But there's also a brutal drug war that goes on in the forests in that area because of the poppy. So we've got a lot of the less developed countries are the ones that are producing the illegal drugs and trying to get them to the more developed countries because the MDCs are the ones who are, using them. Now, that just shows the desperation that a lot of less developed countries have to try to get a product that they can sell to the more developed countries for money to support their economy. Now, cocaine and the coca is from this area, the coca plant, and so it's grown in South America, and then trafficked often through Central America and Mexico, which is a reason for, I know I've mentioned the violence in El Salvador. So one of the reasons for that violence is that drug trade. Also for the war in Mexico is the drug trade. So von Thunen is a model. This is an old model. So he's German. This is before the Industrial Revolution, and so it seems like it'd be different, but the idea is still resonates today. So he basically said that if you take this in a perfect model, meaning that there's no, the soil is the same, that everything is the same throughout this entire area, and that it's just surrounded by wilderness, not by another city, you've got the market being extremely important for the location that you can sell your agricultural products. And so, and this is an isolated state, so it's only going to be this one model. Farmers are going to act to maximize their profits. And so what's going to be grown in these various rings has to do with how much it costs to transport it. So it's going to, if it's really expensive to transport and you need it in the, if it's a product for people to eat or to use in the city, you're going to want to be close to the city. If it's cheaper or if it's, requires a lot of land, you're going to be out further. So rent or land value decreases the further away that you get from the central market. So that's the other factor that you need to take into account. And then, of course, it increases as you get to the center. And so the farm located closer to the market is going to select crops with higher transportation costs, and it's going to have less, things that can be transported less expensively in the outer rings. So you've got some, in the first ring, you're going to have things that would otherwise spoil before they got to the market, so you have to get those to the market quickly. And so those would be things like vegetables, fruit, and then, or just dairy products in general, milk and other dairy products. So you have to produce those very close to the city. Now this has changed a little bit, of course, because we have refrigeration, but you still, we don't import our milk generally from other countries of the world. We still have them within, the region, or at least within our country, because we want them to be close. And then for vegetables, we're going to get them from Central America rather than get them from, New Zealand or from Thailand, because again, you want them to be fresh and close. The second ring is going to be timber and firewood for building and for fuel, and of course this is going to be very expensive to transport, and so that's why it's going to be close, and you're going to have it in the second ring. Alright, and then the third ring is going to be things like wheat for bread and grains, things that last longer than dairy products. They're lighter than fuel, and so the transportation costs are going to be lower, and so they can be located further from the city, and also they don't have to worry about going bad by the time they get there. And then the fourth ring is going to be the ranching, and so this is the final ring, and you've got animals that can be raised far from the city, and then you can have your cows walk into the city, for example, for butchering. That just sounds so cruel, doesn't it? And so that, that allows you to have them further out, and then, and of course you're going to use, a lot of land out there in that outer ring. So then we've got unoccupied wilderness, and so you're not going to have things to transport into the city from there because it's too far away, because, this was before cars and things that could really transport things. So even though it was a long time ago, it's still an important model. You need to be familiar with it. And so it really, what it's important about it is it helps you think about the balance between transportation and the cost of land. And so as you get closer to the city, this is still true today. As you get closer to the market area, your price of land is going to increase. As you get further away, it might be cheaper, but it's still going to cost more to transport it. And so you have to balance that really all out. So of course this is just a model. It's not going to happen that way in the real world. So here's another example of this modified, and so von Thunen around a river. You still have these same basic rings, but instead of rings, they're lines of the different regions. Okay, so here we've got a model that was made based on the idea that New York City is your main market in the country, and so looking at two different ways of doing it, so you can see that you've got the dairy and the vegetables close by for both of these, and then a little bit different way that they laid some of them out, but you've got wheat out here, and then you've got your beef and cattle so farther away, and then your forest, and then in this one you've got your some specialty crops there. Of course, we do grow a lot of things in California, so you could look at this as a model that is somewhat realistic in the sense that the East Coast is where the majority of our population is, and so we do have, and if you look at some of these breaks, we do have some of these trends of where things are located in our country. We've got major truck farming areas in California, Texas, and Florida with those vegetables, and then after World War II, we have more truck farming becoming important in places like Connecticut and blueberries in Maine, and Rhode Island has a lot of chicken and poultry, and so dairying in Vermont. And so we do have these areas that are especially known for their products, and especially on the East Coast, where you're going to be close to the markets of the East Coast. All right, so strategies to increase the world's food supply. So we've talked about a bunch of these. I'll just go through them quick. So increase exports from countries with surpluses. A lot of the developed countries rather, expanding agricultural land, that's, and farming it more intensively, expanding fishing, we'll talk about in a minute, and then increasing productivity, so that green revolution, which is the third agricultural revolution with the higher yielding seeds and the inputs, and then GMOs. So GMOs are fairly new and they're controversial. So a lot of places in the world and even Americans are not comfortable with it because it's taking the idea of traditional methods of plant breeding, and so just introducing different genes and trying to get rid of unwanted characteristics and breed for desirable characteristics. And so now with GMO, it's actual genetic engineering, and so you take a specific gene and cut it out. You're actually changing the DNA instead of just splicing the genes together. And so that process then is making, some people, just nervous because we don't know really what that means and what that means for the future. Although they can be, they can be an efficient way to grow things, or they're bred for certain resistances. And so really, if you look here, it's North America and South America that are growing the genetically modified organisms to sell to other places, to export to other places. Now, the yellow is people that are growing them, but that aren't necessarily exporting them, and then these are people that are importing, so the red. And so you've got a lot of the rest of the world is, starting to import, although a lot of European countries now are starting to make them illegal and will not accept them. Again, there's some health concerns, and people just aren't sure what it means, what's going to happen. So here's an example of the way that breeding was done over time. And so with the natural peach from 4,000 years ago until now, an artificial, meaning this has been selectively bred over time, and so they've really changed what it is, because I don't know about you, but I'd rather eat that peach than the other peach. And so we've got a difference there. And then for meats, regular versus cloned. And so it just brings up the issue that people have a lot of discomfort with, with GMOs, and what does all that science mean for our food supply. So one of the strategies of increasing the world's food supply is expanding fishing, and humans' consumption of fish has gone up very rapidly. And one of the reasons that we've been able to provide more fish is because of aquaculture, aqua farming, and so under controlled conditions. However, even with that actually can cause a lot of pollution, and there can be some issues with that. And there's also a lot of overfishing going on, especially for the larger predatory fish. There is a lot of concern that we're just wiping out our oceans of a lot of different fish, and then harming those entire habitats. So here's human consumption of fish. So developing countries are actually going up more so than the developed countries, but it's gone up in both places. And then fish production, so the capture, it's kind of evened off a little bit, and then so total goes up, and then aquaculture has really gone up a lot. All right, so sustainable agriculture is just including things like sensitive land management, so trying to plant in a way that increases organic matter, that cares for the soil, and so without disturbing the natural microbes in the soil, and so that's going to make healthier food. And it's also going to, you're not going to be required to put in those chemical inputs, which can in the long run harm the soil. So organic farming and sustainable sees the soil as a living organism that's to be cultivated, not to be destroyed with chemicals. And so limited use of chemicals is another aspect of it. And so they do use some chemicals, some fertilizers and things, but of course not not Roundup. Roundup, by the way, is all genetically modified organisms are Roundup ready, which means that they've been bred so that Roundup is that herbicide, and Roundup will not kill them, and so they're resistant to Roundup. And you can spray all Roundup everywhere on your fields, but unfortunately that means that if we're eating those foods, we're eating Roundup as well, which is people have concerns about the health issues with that. And so limited use of chemicals, and then better integration of crops and livestock. So similar to mixed crop and livestock farming, but trying to do so sustainably. So making sure that you have enough of the grains to feed the animals, and then the animals provide manure to fertilize your field. So it keeps a nice balance. And that's really an old-fashioned way of farming, and we're going back to it. All right, so organic farming is one type of sustainable farming. It's kind of the most sustainable of the sustainable types of farming because it really is concerned with keeping your soil in balance and keeping the microbes alive in the soil. So it's better for the earth. It does not degrade the soil in the way that the chemicals and that kind of farming does. Also, we don't have the chemical runoffs into our water supplies. We don't have, you're not giving antibiotics to the animals, and so there's not a concern with the overuse of antibiotics and antibiotic resistance that comes with the other, the regular kind of farming, and so that we have today. And I say regular because, in the United States, we don't have a huge amount of organic farmers, although that is growing and that is changing. Of course, we've got problems with certainly problems with it being expensive, and not everybody can afford it.